You're listening to the Nutrition Experts Podcast, featuring guests who take the scientific talk about food and break it down for practical use. You've heard the phrase, "You are what you eat." Come find out what that really means. Experience conversations with experts in the field of nutrition and understand the power of food for our health, well-being, and beyond. Now, here's your host, registered dietitian and nutritionist, Mathea Ford.
Hi there, it's Mathea. Welcome back to the Nutrition Experts Podcast, the podcast featuring nutrition experts who are leading the way using food starts today, right now, with our next guest. It's great to have Ginger Hultin on the show today. All right, Ginger, I'm excited to have you on my show. Can you tell my listeners a little more about you and what you do?
Sure. Yeah. So glad to be talking to you today. I am a registered dietitian and I'm working out of Seattle. I got into the profession partly because I was previously in the fitness industry, and then partly because I was previously in the restaurant industry. And that's one reason that I created the brand Champagne Nutrition. I have a lot of passion for going out, eating out, wine, and champagne while still being healthy.
Great. What did you do in the restaurant industry?
I started just as a hostess. I worked in restaurants for 8 or 9 years while I was going through school because becoming a dietitian is very time consuming. I ended up being a bartender and a restaurant manager. So I really got to understand people's relationship to food and their passion for food.
And you got a lot of practice as counselor, I'm sure, as the bartender, right?
Oh, so much. It's such an interesting way to meet and talk to people.
Well, I myself am a food service type dietitian, so totally love that you have that background. And I think it's very valuable when talking to people about their food to understand food preparation, food issues, recipes, that type of stuff. So today we're here, though, to talk about the vegetarian diet. So can you give a little overview, talk about the vegetarian diet and why it might be a good choice for someone?
Yeah, I think that even the term vegetarian is a little confusing for people, and it actually carries a lot of emotion. So just to break down what that means, a vegetarian diet simply excludes meat and seafood. But you could be something called a lacto-ovu vegetarian, lacto meaning dairy and ovo meaning eggs. So some people do include those foods and still call themselves vegetarian. You could also be a pescaterian, which is basically a vegetarian that also eats fish. And you could be many combinations of those things. Of course, there's vegans. They're a type of vegetarian, but they actually exclude all animal foods, including no dairy and no honey, because it's made from, or bees make it. And then there's this very hot phrase right now called plant-based diet. That could mean a lot of different things, but many people use it to mean eating less meat or very little meat, or just eating a lot more plant foods.
When somebody says they're vegetarian, you have to kind of figure out what layer of vegetarian that is. What made you interested in vegetarian nutrition?
It's actually one of my earliest memories. I have a memory of refusing a ham sandwich when I was probably 5 years old. So I have this personal history of first not liking meat and just eating mostly plant foods. And then I think as a teenager, it was very trendy to be vegetarian. But then as I got older, and especially as I started learning more about nutrition, I realized the amazing health benefits, the environmental benefits, and it also became more about animal welfare for me. Really happy to practice for all those reasons with vegetarian nutrition as a dietitian.
What would you say are some of the benefits of eating a vegetarian diet?
There's a lot of different types of benefits, like a lower body weight, cardiovascular health, and improved labs for heart health, and also a lower cancer risk of many kinds. I actually am a CSO, so that stands for a board certified specialist in oncology nutrition. So I've done a lot of work around vegetarian diets and cancer. I also think there's some really powerful environmental benefits. And like I said, animal welfare benefits. They're saying right now the average consumer is going to be eating over 200 pounds of meat or poultry in the US this year. So that really exceeds the amount that is suggested to eat. It's a really important topic.
So when you talk about animal welfare, what specifically does that involve?
Well, A lot of people are vegetarians or vegans to reduce animal suffering and the need for reliance for people to get their protein from animals. So of course, it's going to cut down just on animal suffering and or death if we are not eating them at all. There's lots and lots of different kinds of plant proteins to eat that are really equal in nutrition.
So I know it's an old myth that you have to kind of mix your proteins to get at a meal, to get a complete protein. Don't you risk some issues if you don't eat protein, especially as a teenager or during pregnancy? Are there no issues with that? Can you get all the protein, not necessarily just protein, but all the nutrients that you need by just eating a plant-based, a vegetarian, vegan diet?
The Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics has a new position paper that came out just about a year or two ago. And their position is that vegetarian and vegan diets are appropriate for all stages of the life cycle. And that includes pregnancy, lactation, infants, children, adolescents, and older adults. Also the same for athletes. So really, as long as you're balancing the diet appropriately, and that goes for meat eaters too. Everyone needs to be balancing their diet appropriately, but it's safe for everyone.
How do you get your protein that you need or all of your nutrients? I mean, any diet is general in nature, but how do people who eat a vegetarian diet really make sure that they get that nutrition, that nutrient dense food that they need?
The biggest nutrient of concern for plant-based diets is B12. That's the only nutrient that is found only in animal foods. So if you're a vegetarian, if you eat dairy, eggs, or fish, probably you're okay. The needs for B12, just for reference, is 2.4 micrograms a day for men and women. One egg has 0.6. A cup of milk has 1.2, and fortified breakfast cereal has a lot. It has 6 micrograms. So you can very easily meet your needs for B12 if you're a vegetarian. And if you're a vegan, you can either eat fortified foods or you can simply take a supplement just for safety there. So B12 is the biggest nutrient of concern. Other nutrients that people often have questions about on a plant-based diet are calcium, zinc, omega-3s, that's essential fatty acid, and iron, vitamin D as well. But almost all those nutrients, maybe vitamin D aside, can really be found in plants.
So basically what you're saying is that all nutrients or all foods that you would eat on a vegetarian diet, as long as you're eating a variety of them, so beans, nuts, seeds, vegetables, fruits, if you ate a variety of those, you're going to be able to get protein from that. There's protein in all foods, or there's protein in at least some of those foods?
Yeah, great question. So the main protein sources for vegetarians are beans and lentils, nuts and seeds, and soy foods. Those actually are a pretty important staple for vegetarian and vegan diets. There is small amount of protein in whole grains and vegetables, but really veggies and vegans need to be eating those beans, lentils, nuts, seeds, and soy foods. You can easily meet your protein needs that way, but I do meet a lot of people that are following a vegetarian diet and eating mostly carbohydrates, like fruits and vegetables only. And those people will sometimes tell me, I don't feel like I have energy, or I'm craving meat. And when I look at their diet, I realize they're not eating enough protein. So then we do a simple education. They bump the plant proteins up to meet their needs, and they often feel much better.
You mentioned a little bit about, a healthy weight, heart health, cancer benefit. What does research show specifically for a benefit of eating vegetarian in general, and maybe for those specific conditions?
Plant-based dietary patterns are strongly associated with a lower body mass index. That's a lower body weight and also less weight around the middle. So that's showing up pretty strongly. Vegetarian diets are also associated with a reduction in risk of cardiovascular disease. So they're very heart healthy. They affect labs such as blood pressure. They bring cholesterol levels down, and they can also bring blood sugar down. So there's this protection against diabetes as well. There's also some data out there that supports that vegetarian diets can calm inflammation, including markers like CRP. That's a pretty common one that a doctor might pull. Finally, like I mentioned, one of my passions is cancer care. And there's very strong evidence that vegetarian and vegan diets are associated with lower overall cancer risk, but especially of the GI. So like stomach and especially colon cancer. They think maybe vegetarian diets are a lot higher in fiber and certain nutrients. There's also some protection against prostate cancer. So pretty amazing research out there about very specific, well-proven health benefits of eating less meat and more plants.
So what is it about eating less meat, more plants that gives those values? For example, with weight, what is it about a vegetarian diet that tends to cause those people to have a lower weight on average?
Well, these vegetarians and vegans are eating less saturated fat generally. They're having higher intakes of low-calorie foods like vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, soy foods, nuts, and seeds. And those are all really rich in fiber, but they also have a lot of vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants. So it's hard to suss out exactly what is causing the benefit, but it's likely the overall dietary structure and the big picture patterns that's having the weight and health benefits.
So they're eating more nutrient-dense foods, more fiber. There may be some other factors in there just purely from the plants that we don't understand yet that seem to provide a benefit. A lot of vegetarian foods can be unhealthy. You mentioned people eat a lot of carbohydrates, maybe don't necessarily know they're supposed to be eating beans and lentils. But for example, cookies, donuts, cakes, pies, those can be vegetarian. But what's the best way to get the benefits of a vegetarian diet without making too many pitfalls? And what might be some of those pitfalls that people make?
You are so right. I mean, Oreos are vegan. That's like a classic vegan, dessert. You could also be a vegetarian and you can live on mac and cheese or French fries. That isn't meat. You could call yourself a vegetarian. So certainly you can do a vegetarian diet very unhealthfully, just like you could do a omnivorous diet very unhealthfully. But balanced appropriately, they can be really amazing. It takes about as much time to make like a black bean burger as it does to make a beef burger. When you're eating vegetarian, you're just purchasing some different foods and you're making different recipes, but a lot of them are very quick and easy, grab and go. I think it can be a really simple balance for people that are changing.
So what kind of things do people get wrong when they first try to start a vegetarian diet?
The number one thing is, I think people say, okay, I'm going to be a vegetarian. And then they just start eating vegetables and fruit. So it's super low in calories, no fat, and no protein. So really people need to do that My Healthy Plate, the whole grain carbohydrates, healthy fat, and protein at every meal and snack so that everything's balanced and you're getting the nutrients that you need and the protein.
If you think about your family, you're like, I want to make healthier choices for my family. I want to improve our diet. I see that a vegetarian diet is a good way to eat. Is that way sustainable for a family with a busy lifestyle? Or what types of things can you do to make it more sustainable if you're constantly driving, carpool, dropping kids off, picking kids up, that type of thing?
Absolutely. I kind of fall into that category myself. I live this on-the-go lifestyle. So the good news is more fast food restaurants and restaurants in general and grocery stores, even gas stations, are starting to offer more plant-based or vegetarian options. So it's getting easier and easier. For example, the Seattle airport just opened an awesome vegetarian restaurant where you can either sit and eat if you're waiting for your plane, or you can do grab and go. So I think it's going to continue as a very hot trend to become easier for on-the-go folks. But, there's some really simple recipes you can make ahead, just like you could plan ahead for an omnivorous diet. One bowl dishes where you put like grains and beans and veggies and sauce together. That's so simple for dinner, and it also makes great leftovers. You could do stir fries using tofu. You could do tacos using beans or tempeh. Casseroles, the same thing. You could do lentil stews, salads, veggie burgers. There's so many options that are awesome for a family. And for busy families, it can also be more affordable as well.
You mentioned that as a young girl, it was kind of a trendy thing to be more vegetarian. I have a daughter as well that is kind of trending that way. And I just want to know maybe what should parents or caregivers be concerned about, if there's anything to be concerned about with a teenager who, is going through a growth stage and making a determination to be vegetarian. You mentioned that they're healthy for all those types of events in our life, but is there anything specific that we might want to watch for or be concerned about?
I think that teenagers are maybe the most susceptible for going vegetarian, but in an unhealthy way. Like you said, cookies, donuts, cakes, I mentioned French fries. I mean, all of these are kind of classic teen foods, and they can be very devoid of protein and also lacking in nutrients. So especially for girls on the go and teens that are athletes and feeding their brains for learning, they really need to have some education about, they're going to be eating beans. They're going to be eating tofu. They need to be eating nuts and seeds, and they need to be willing to do that. It's actually an amazing way for teens to start learning about nutrition and balanced diets at an early age. And I think meeting with a dietitian, even a few times, can go a long way for those folks.
We have, listeners that are dietitians, that are medical professionals, and I always try to provide some ways that as healthcare professionals, we can help people who either have this condition, if it's a condition, or help people, maybe even make some more plant-based diet choices. So what are some ways that listeners can help their clients to make these choices or to even just suggest them to them?
Absolutely. I think working clinically, it's very easy. There's such a range of health benefits, whether someone's working on their weight, whether they're at a specific stage in life, trying to meet protein needs as an athlete, trying to meet nutrient needs as a teen, like we were talking about, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer. Anyone clinically might be asking questions about how to improve their diet for those conditions. So that's a really simple way to start talking about plant-based diets. I think there's also a lot of opportunity in food service because schools, hospitals, restaurants, and a lot of our large institutions like airports are starting to adopt more vegetarian cuisine, partially because of consumer demand, but also to save money. And then in the community, whether we're talking about health, animal welfare, or money saving or the environment, I think there's a lot of work to be done there too. So dietitians working in any type of facility might really be talking about this, and hopefully working with doctors and nurses, other healthcare providers that are also using evidence-based research to say, hey, we should be eating more plants.
What types of suggestions do you give those people to start to increase the plant-based amount in their diet?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because a lot of people are still a little scared of being fully vegan or fully vegetarian, and they really don't have to be. One example I use is a pretty well-known movement, Meatless Monday, and that's a group that says, hey, why don't you just eat meatless one day a week? And that can actually make an impact on the environment and on your health. So what I'll talk to people is, what kind of foods do you enjoy? Oh, I love making tacos. Well, how can we experiment with making that without meat by using seasonings to still make it delicious and mixing up the diet to include different types of really nutritious foods? I think a lot of times it's just a simple swap.
So being a vegetarian is not necessarily all salads, right?
I really think people are doing themselves a disservice if that's the way they're eating. And like I said, if you're eating vegetables only, you're going to be missing out on some really important food groups. So I think really the way to think about it is, what kind of foods do you like now? And how can you swap the meat out and add in different plant foods instead? There's
some excellent thoughts I have. I've actually heard of a food called a jackfruit.
Yeah.
Do you have any experience with that? Can you talk a little bit about that, about how you might maybe use that in your diet or what it would value?
Yeah, jackfruit's very cool. It shreds up so that it's actually the consistency of like pulled pork. It's a very interesting, hearty fruit. And what people are doing is, putting barbecue sauce and lots of flavorings on it and eating it like they might pork. The problem is, I will tell you, jackfruit is a fruit. It's not a protein. So if you ate like a jackfruit sandwich, you really wouldn't be getting the protein you need. So it's a super fun thing to experiment with, but understanding which foods are carbohydrates and which foods are protein is an important balance there.
So what does the typical person, what amount of protein, if they're reading labels, looking at stuff, if this is at all of concern, what amount of protein should they be looking to eat?
So it really depends on someone's stage of life, body size, and activity, but just very rough ballpark. Many clients I work with need between, say, 50 to 70 grams of protein a day. So really, you're just looking at which foods have protein, whether it's beans, lentils, soy foods, soy milk, fortified foods, protein powder. Maybe you do eat some eggs, dairy, or fish. Lots of options there. And just spreading those throughout the day to make sure that you're getting a protein source at every meal and snack, and then it's adding up to your unique needs. To know what you actually need, you should definitely meet with a registered dietitian because needs do range quite a bit.
So there's no vegetarian police, right? So if I wanted to eat, like you said, a meatless Monday and the rest of the week, have meat in my diet, that just makes me healthier and kind of going in the right direction. There's nobody going to come to my house and say, you can't call yourself a vegetarian, or what kind of vegetarian would that be?
That might be someone called more like a flexitarian, someone that eats vegetarian sometimes, but not all the time. Personally, and I've been a practicing dietitian for a long time, if I was working with someone that was eating more plant-based, eating less meat, I would still say they could call themselves a vegetarian. I think it really is personal for each individual. There is no vegetarian police. Everyone's just trying to do the best thing for their bodies. And I also want to point out that meat's not a bad thing. I think humans are designed to eat meat. It's very nutrient dense. It's got some benefits too. I just want people to understand that not eating it or eating it is an option. And you don't have to eat meat to be healthy. There's actually a lot of evidence shows that eating less meat is a very healthy way to be.
What types of foods, if somebody's thinking, I want to eat more plant-based and it's getting to be summer, I want to plant a garden. Do you have any suggestions for types of things that they might include in a garden that would be the most nutrient dense for them?
Herbs and spices go a long way. Another reason that people sometimes try to eat vegetarian or vegan and don't like it is because they don't flavor their food. So I give this example. Let's say you were going to make a steak on the grill. A lot of people will go to great lengths to pound it, put some marinade on it, put some sauce on it, really think about how they're going to balance the flavors and enhance the steak that they're making. So you have to do the same thing. Let's say you're going to grill some tofu. If you just eat tofu on its own, it doesn't have a lot of flavor. Same with beans. If you just eat a bean, it tastes kind of neutral. So the more you put fresh basil or hot chili flakes or sauces or seasonings, all those delicious herbs and spices you can grow in your garden, those are going to really enhance the flavor of vegetarian food and make it equal or even more delicious than meat-based foods.
That's perfect. And you can bring those herbs and spices into your house all year long, whether it's the growing season or not. You can grow them in your house or outside. So that's a perfect example. And I love, love, love fresh herbs and spices. So, all right. So Ginger, what do you see as how this vegetarian diet is changing healthcare, affecting healthcare, and what sort of research is being done to enable that?
It's such a hot trend. I mean, whether you're a vegetarian or vegan yourself or not, as a healthcare provider, you're getting asked about it all the time because so many celebrities are becoming vegans or foregoing meat. It's all over the news and it's just this very hot trend. So a lot of people will be asking all dietitians about this. And I think we should be armed to provide evidence-based research. Like I mentioned, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics position paper on vegetarian diets is a really great resource. It really breaks down the current large studies that were pulled to say plant-based diets help with cardiovascular disease, help with diabetes, and reduce body weight, and also help reduce cancer. So gigantic studies like the Adventist Health Study are out there that are looking at huge populations and the benefits of eating less meat. So very well documented research and lots of places we can roll this out, whether it's in schools or hospitals. It's going to save money and it could improve health outcomes as well.
With eating a lot more plant-based, you have the concern, or you may hear the concern about GMOs, genetically modified organisms. Yes. Okay. So is there any concern with that that's evidence-based? And is there any sort of ways that people need to make choices about foods so they don't have any issues?
That's a great question. Very, very hot, passion-filled topic. Right now, there's no evidence that genetically modified foods are negatively affecting health. So really, that's not a huge concern when you're choosing fruits and veggies. I would also say the same thing about organic. There's not evidence that fruits or veggies should be consumed less. Let's say, for example, somebody couldn't afford organic. They should still choose a conventional because fruits and veggies are so, so healthy. That's the bottom line, is people need to be eating those foods.
That's a great point. So the benefit of the food and in and of itself is huge for your health. And like you said, right now, there's no evidence that you should avoid it just due to that type of concern. One question I try to ask all my visitors is, what is your favorite food?
I might have to say pizza myself. I am a bit obsessed. I love tomatoes, and pizzas are this amazing vehicle for veggies. You can just put anything you enjoy on them. Like we were talking about herbs and spices, I love fresh basil on there. And it's also kind of a fun year-round food. You can eat it in summer, you can eat it in winter, and it makes awesome leftovers.
That's true. And you can actually even make it for multiple people. So if you have someone who wants meat on their side of the pizza and you don't want any, you just want all veggies, you can make it very flexible.
Absolutely. You were mentioning family meals and getting together and eating that way. So if you do have many different diets in a family, pizza is actually kind of a fun way to go.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Well, Ginger, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It was a pleasure to have you on the show. I know my listeners have learned a lot about the vegetarian diet and how to incorporate it, even just to be a little healthier. And so if listeners want to connect with you, what is the best way to do that?
Oh, I'd love to connect with anyone. I'm very active on social media. So my Instagram, I post a lot of my vegetarian recipes I create and also my cocktail recipes and some of my adventures at restaurants in Seattle and beyond. I'm active on Twitter and I've got a Facebook page too. Pretty active Pinterest as well. And you can always find me talking about vegetarianism and healthy eating out on the go and champagne at my blog, champagnenutrition.com.
Great. And you also work with a startup, right?
I do. That's my daytime, full-time job. It's called Airavail. And what I do there is I counsel people on the phone using their lab values, their genetics, and actually we do some microbiome and salivary cortisol as well. I graduated from Bastyr University in Seattle. So really my approach to working with any person is very holistic. I'm an integrative practitioner. So really looking at the whole person. That's why I love having lab values and genetics and doing behavior change counseling on the phone.
Well, guys, that has been another great episode of the Nutrition Experts Podcast, the podcast that is all about learning more so you can do more with nutrition in your life.
You've just listened to an episode of the Nutrition Experts Podcast. Be sure to get more information about this week's episode at www.nutritionexpertspodcast.com. Tune in next time for another great conversation with a nutrition expert and expand your personal knowledge in the field of nutrition, one conversation at a time.